So hello Vicky, and thanks for joining me this afternoon. I'm kind of pretending to be at Teesside University at the moment, one of my pop-up locations around Teesside that I'm using. So can you tell me a little bit about what you do, about your own practice in involvement in the creative arts, and how you evolved more generally?
Yeah, hi. So I'm not pretending, I am actually at home. This is my home background. Yep, I'm a visual artist. So my own practice is kind of rooted within kind of drawing, sculpture, printmaking, those sorts of art forms. And it really just depends on what body of work I'm kind of working on at any one point in time, depending on what I might use. And I might veer off into other things as well. So like a lot of artists, it's sometimes a little bit hard to describe and kind of really pin down exactly what kind of artist you are, I think. But yeah, they're the main art forms anyway. And I'm also a director of Navigator North, which is an artist-led organisation based in Middlesbrough. So we've been going for, this is actually our 10th year. So we are planning, like COVID allowing, later in the year, some kind of 10th kind of milestone birthday type celebrations. But basically, just in a bit of a nutshell, Navigator is around to support artists, basically. So we do that in two ways. So we run studios for artists. So we've got approximately 30 studio holders at the minute across sites in Middlesbrough, Tees Valley. We've had some in County Durham as well in the past. We've been doing that for about 9 years, and we also run programs of support for artists, so things like mentoring, bursaries, residencies, which are sometimes kind of themed around particular topics. So yeah, fully immersed in the art world, I would say, in terms of being an artist and running arts projects.
Brilliant. So has that always been the case? Have you always been involved in the arts since, like, as a kid, were you involved?
Yeah, I would say so. I've always been interested. I've always kind of been interested in drawing and just making, really, just kind of playing with materials and making things. And I was always encouraged from quite a young age that that was a good thing to do. I was encouraged to study as well, so to go to university and study fine art, which is, you know, yeah, what job do you get if you study fine art? I mean, you know, it's not as if there's a very clear career path. So, but I was totally encouraged to kind of follow that passion and yeah, no, so from a very early age, I would say.
Okay, I think that's brilliant that you were encouraged.
Mm,
As you say, it's not really seen as a way to make money.
no.
Although, recently I've found out that actually it seems to be a huge part of our economy, and that just doesn't seem to be recognised.
No, it isn't. And I think for like emerging artists, so as part of the work that we do with Navigator, you know, we do work with emerging artists, and it's that sense of kind of that drive of knowing that that's what they want to pursue, but perhaps not knowing how they can sort of earn a living or kind of get the value kind of that they need to kind of to be able to continue that work. So it is a tricky one, and I think it can be a little bit of a barrier as well, depending on your background, you know, and you know whether you're getting any financial support from your family to study, even those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Been interested to hear people's differing opinions on funding of the arts, and particularly maybe the visual arts more than any other. And
Yeah.
line that we and decisions that we all have to make as artists is whether that is going to be the way that we make money, and therefore perhaps having to compromise in some ways, or finding other ways to make money and being able to do art unimpeded.
Yeah.
But without funding, have to say it tends to be the whiter, the wealthier segments of population that are allowed or able to engage with the arts without any kind of funding or backup.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue, and I think it's definitely one that kind of recent times have sort of started to, it's been closer, looked at a bit more closely and unpicked in terms of kind of just the general question around privilege and what that means. And it applies on lots of levels. Yeah.
Absolutely. So personally, I think having organisations like Navigator North is incredibly important, and I know quite a few people that have benefited from it. Not just terms, as you say, not just in terms of the financial support, but for the mentorship, and also just that recognition that whoever's artistic practice is kind of worth that kind of support.
Yeah, thanks. That's good to hear. It's always good to hear when we get kind of positive kind of feedback that what we are doing is kind of, again, for us, it's valued and it's useful, and we're trying to make a difference in our own way. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, brilliant. So kind of touching on that a bit, and what we said about making a living. I'm interested to know your thoughts about the importance of the arts to maybe to people who aren't engaged with the arts, and to those that are, in terms of not just the end product of like I'm writing a poem or I'm writing a book, I'm putting on an exhibition, but the process itself and what that can contribute to individuals and to society more generally.
Yeah, well, again, that's a very diverse, there's lots of ways of sort of addressing that, isn't there, and kind of answering that. But I suppose from my personal experience, I wear a couple of different hats, obviously, because I've got my own creative practice, and then I've got the work that I do as a director of Navigator. I've also got quite a long history of working in sort of engagement settings, so working with schools and colleges and museums and galleries, specifically around kind of participation and engagement with the arts. So there's that side of things as well, which I think in the last sort of few years there's been a lot more there's been a lot more evidence for kind of the impact on kind of society and health and well-being that kind of involvement in the arts and even exposure to the arts actually can bring to people. So I think that's, in terms of kind of the impact on society, it's all to do with, well, it's culture, isn't it? Culture and society kind of sit together. So that's something that I've seen firsthand through kind of the engagement work that I've done. We see it with Navigator kind of projects as well, and our focus is, I would say, quite clearly on artists and supporting artists, but then that has a secondary kind of engagement in terms of audiences and the public, and thinking about our community as a whole, really, and what it is to be a human being as part of society and as part of a community. And that could be a very local community, it could be Middlesbrough, it could be Tees Valley, it could be the UK, it could be global. So it's kind of all those different levels and those different ways of connecting, which I think being involved in the arts can offer. Yeah. The other thing to mention is as well, you can see where this could go on and on and on in terms of lots of connections, but I'm part of a female-led artist collective called Blimey. So we're sort of loosely based in Darlington, but kind of really sit within sort of Tees Valley. And we've been doing some work recently around kind of like rethinking what engagement might mean, thinking about co-production, thinking about collective practice. And that's really thrown up some quite interesting things for us recently. So I think it's just part of an ongoing kind of, it's kind of a bit of a ripple effect in some ways, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads me on to the mandatory lockdown question. Just really interested to know how it's affected you personally, again, as an artist, and how it's affected the work that you do with the organisations that you're involved in, and how you see how things going to go over the next year or so.
God, that last one, I'll come to that one. I don't know that last one. But I suppose, yeah, so on three fronts, kind of myself as an artist with a creative practice, I've used it as a bit of an opportunity to sort of take a little bit of a step back and kind of think about how I focus my time and energies. what it means to be an artist who kind of works within engagement settings. I've been thinking quite a lot about that as well. Yeah, I would say that as a freelancer on that side of stuff as well, pretty much all of my work just came to a bit of an abrupt end. Like any projects that were lined up just disappeared overnight. So that was quite challenging. But I think you've got to see the positives, and I think it has allowed for kind of a bit of a rethink and a reevaluation of those aspects. So yeah, that's been, and I've done a bit of a studio cleanup as well, so that's quite good. Then in terms of Blimey Collective, we had an exhibition that had been open for about 2 weeks at the Bowes Museum. That was shut down end of March, and very uncertain in terms of what would happen with it. Yeah, whether it would reopen. It did reopen, which is great, and we've extended the exhibition, and we've kind of had to adapt some of our project plans. So we planned on doing a lot of like physical events and in-person events, and we've had to change those to like a more online program, which actually I think in some ways might have worked out for the better. It might give a wider, broader reach to those things that we're putting out there online, rather than it being within a building just on one day. So yeah, again, seeing the positives. And then Navigator stuff that was quite challenging, I would say, sort of April sort of time, when we were pretty much scrabbling around for whatever funding we could find. We were fortunate enough to get some Arts Council emergency funding, which is now coming to an end, because that was for a 6-month period. And we were able to support some of the artists we work with, all of our studio holders, to put like a package of support for them in place, which is amazing that we could do that actually. But now we're on to kind of like the next phase of, well, basically what next? So again, it's looking at where is the funding, how can we continue to do what we need to do, what we want to do to support artists. So it's just a bit watch this space, really. We're putting a lot of energy into it, so fingers crossed.
Yep. Well, as you say, it's hard to plan when you don't know what you're planning for.
Yeah.
Again, looking on the positive side, I hope that if everything does go back to non-social distancing and enjoyment of arts and events, that perhaps some of this technology that we're using here, like you say, if you just have an exhibition for one day at a certain venue, really restricts the amount of people that can come and appreciate that exhibition, and perhaps makes it a little bit exclusive to people who can afford to travel, people who can afford to go out.
Yeah.
And also, like for the deaf community, I hope that this has a bit of an impact. I don't see why, like the AI transcriber I'm using for these can't be used at live events. You could just have a monitor there just running.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of stuff that perhaps
we're all learning new things, aren't we? We're all learning how to sort of rethink as well. Like, some of the stuff that we've never even thought of before. One of the things about COVID-19 is it's really kind of prompted us to have a good rethink and learn different ways of adapting. And yeah. So it can be a good thing.
Let's hope so. I hope it all turns out for the best. Vicky, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I hope we'll chat again soon, and maybe come up with some collaborative ideas for the next year or two.
Brilliant, thanks.
All right, take care.
Cheers, bye.
Try to press the button quickly so we're not just sat here.